Hey there, we're back in the vegetable garden today, and today we're doing some more beautification here. You can see I've got these containers on either side of me. This is on either side of the what I call the front door. And these containers got here out of sort of to solve a problem. So last year I had climbing roses planted in the ground here, and they did not do well. The one on this side did okay. The one on this side completely rotted out. The hole kept filling up with water. So it was a bit of a mystery where this water was coming from. I was a little bit afraid that our drip system had been leaking because we actually buried the main lines underneath the gravel. And I thought that would really be a bummer if that happened because we'd have to dig that all up. And then we turned off the drip system for a while and it kept happening. So we knew it wasn't the drip system. And then I started to get really worried because our septic mound is not far from here. And I thought, what if we've got some sort of septic problem? That wasn't the case. And we finally, for sure, figured it out this winter when I came out here in winter and all of the stones that I had laid on the little path out here were like floated up. Turns out, and then the whole area of the grass, which is mostly moss behind me, and by the way, the moss should have been a clue about what was going on. This is like full clay right here, no drainage whatsoever, and that moss should have been a clue that it was shady with poor drainage because that's kind of the conditions that moss likes. So we didn't have a lot of options other than to really do something to fix the drainage problem here, which sounded like no fun. So what's the solution? Stick a container on top of it. So that's what we've done here. So I've got these two containers. I'm going to be planting roses in them. I'm also ordered some clematis that are coming. The idea is the clematis go over the arbors, roses in the middle, and then I'll just plant like a simple annual along the front of it just to make it pretty. But I want to show you first of all what we did to these containers. So these containers are teak, and I did oil them just for a little bit of protection. But as you can see on the inside here, we have something pink. So first of all, these are a slat bottom on these, so the soil would have gone right through them. And so what we did was we lined the entire thing with 1-inch insulation foam board. And then at the bottom, I have put a layer of landscape fabric over that, and there are holes through the entire thing. So there are holes straight through the landscape fabric. You can kind of see some there. Straight through the landscape fabric, through the insulation that will drain out through the slats in the bottom. So the reason we have this insulation board here is that I don't want to have to move these containers for winter, and I'm planning to plant shrubs in here, which I don't want to have to worry about. So the clematis that is going in here is zone 3. So no problem there whatsoever, because the general rule of thumb is that if you're 2 zones lower, you should be safe to overwinter in a container. The rose, however, which is a David Austin rose called Fighting Temeraire, which is actually a single rose, not your typical David Austin, but kind of sunset colors, really pretty. And I fell in love with it. I was shopping at David Austin to get some roses for someone else, and then I came across it, and then I ended up ordering them. So that's the long story of how we end up with that rose, which is a zone 5. So my hope is that by adding some additional insulation to this pot and providing some winter protection, maybe I'll do some sort of cage with leaves in it or something, but I will protect the crown, that we hopefully we'll be able to overwinter that. So that's the goal. So that's what the insulation is about. I think it'll also help protect the inside of the pot a little bit, which wasn't the original intent, but that's a nice little bonus. I have run drip to this. This is the first container I've ever run drip to in my life. But this vegetable garden, because I've got everything on drip, I can actually leave this vegetable garden for a week and not worry about it, which is really, really nice. If we ever get to go on vacation again, that'll be nice. So if I have this all on a timer, then this should all be good to go. And plus, it's really important when you're growing shrubs in containers that you keep up on the watering, in particular for something like clematis and roses, both of which, you know, they want consistent water. So that's how we have the pot set up here. So I've already mixed up most of my soil here in the wheelbarrow, and probably this, I don't know how far this will go. Once again, I'm using that Organic Mechanics container blend. They sent me some soil this year to use in my projects. In my last video, I had a lot of questions about why I'm trying to go peat free. It's an environmental reason. So not to get in the weeds on this, but just quickly to address that. So peat bogs are huge carbon sinks. They take, I think it takes like 20 years to create a new 1 inch of peat or something like that. And what they do is they trap carbon, and when you harvest peat and spread it around, you release that carbon back into the atmosphere. And there's a lot of information out there. People will tell you different things about it, but what I will say is that there are fabulous alternatives to using peat. So there's really no need to use something that might even have the potential of being harmful. And I think it's more than potential personally, but I think everyone's going to have their own opinion on that. The other thing is that if you've ever used a potting mix that is primarily peat and you allow it to dry out, it is almost impossible to get that wet again. It seems to never really moisten again. So that's another great reason to avoid it. Plus, this is all organic, so that's why I'm really liking these products a lot. And then I've also mixed in, again, I'm using, oops, well, now we have some elsewhere. That's always me spilling something. Biochar blend again, 10% of the overall mix is supposed to be biochar. I am gonna put in a small amount of manure just to add some extra richness here. The clematis in particular will appreciate that. And the rosa will too. I'm always a little wary of putting too much manure though in a container planting, because manure really does bog down the drainage a little bit. So I'm always really wary about not putting in too much of that. And then I am going to use the Biotone starter fertilizer. Normally I like to use mycorrhizal fungi on my roses when I plant them. I have none, and we are living in this age of, if you don't have it right now, you just make do with what you have. So this is what I have. This is what we're going to use. I'm sure it'll work great. Hey, one other tip, you guys, if you get big bags of some sort of soil mix, save those bags, because I hang on to these. This is going to sound so corny. I hang on to these, but if I find a person who has composted, well-aged manure for the digging, these are perfect. And you fill them up about halfway. That way you don't have to worry about transporting manure in your car. You just put it in a bag and it works out great. So I always save these bags. Right now I'm actually using some of them to save leaves. I put too much leaf mulch on top of my garden beds this year in the vegetable garden, and it didn't break down all of it. So I'm scraping some of it off and just storing it in those bags, because it will make great mulch. I just don't need it right this moment. So one of the questions that I know someone's going to ask is, could I fill the bottom of these with something else to take up some of that volume? And the answer is possibly, but I basically never do that with shrubs, because shrubs need as much space and as much soil as they can get in a container. Plus, the more soil volume you have in there, the more water retention it'll have, and the less you will have to water. Okay, so here's the rose. These bare root roses are always so beautiful when they come. I've had great success with the bare root roses from David Austin. In fact, I have better success the first year with them than I often do the second year, which probably says more about how I'm growing roses than anything. But this has been soaking for a couple of hours, 3 hours maybe, 2.5 hours. And you know, you want to bury roses. This is one of those things that you plant deeply. So there's going to be very few stems actually sticking out of this rose when we're done here. Now this rose is supposed to get, actually it's a shrub rose. It should get actually pretty wide. They say 4.5 feet wide, which would make it too big for this spot. I have never once had a problem with a rose getting too big. I should be so lucky as to have a rose get too big. So I'm totally good with planting this here. But you know what? I am going to move this forward a touch. There we go. Just to give, because the clematis is going to go in the back here, and I just want to make sure that clematis has plenty of room to stretch out back there. Anyways, key is obviously to water it really, really, really well. Any rose, when you plant it, just give it a really nice big drink. So admittedly, it doesn't really look like much right now, but you know, let's be honest, most containers don't look great at first. They'll grow in. I am confident they'll do really well this year. What happens after that, we will see. I stopped filling up the soil level a little bit because I knew I'd be planting that clematis in there, and I'm gonna have to dig out a lot of the soil in order to plant that clematis. So it seemed to me like there was no point in continuing to add more soil that I would just have to take out in order to add more in. And you can see some of that insulation board right now. By the time I get that clematis planted and the annuals, that should disappear. And if it doesn't, I can always put a layer of mulch on top of it. I sort of like to use mulch in shrub containers anyway, so that works out pretty well. So that's that. When this is done, this should be a beautiful entryway to the garden. I forgot to mention that these roses are supposed to have a fabulous honey scent. And to me, I'm really just about roses that have scent lately. I don't mind growing other kinds of roses, but I don't even really consider them to be roses. I consider them to be just shrubs. So fabulous honey scent. Imagine a clematis going over the top. Let's cross our fingers and hope that comes to fruition.